You know that moment when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who were never listening? Carl Jung discovered something that will completely change how you see that moment. He found that there's a specific psychological transformation that happens to empaths, and it absolutely terrifies every manipulator who encounters it. I'm not talking about revenge or becoming cold. I'm talking about something far more powerful and infinitely more dangerous to toxic people. Jung called it the alchemical reversal, when years of absorbing others' poison suddenly transforms into unbreakable psychological gold. And here's the kicker. Manipulators can sense this transformation before the empath even realizes it's happening. Their unconscious mind detects the shift and they panic, because they know their free supply of emotional labor just became unavailable forever. Let me tell you what Jung discovered in his clinical practice that he rarely spoke about publicly. He noticed that his most empathic patients, the ones everyone called too sensitive, had something remarkable happen when they reached their breaking point. They didn't break, they transformed. Jung documented this pattern over decades. The gentle souls who absorbed everyone's emotions, who apologized for things they didn't do, who gave until they had nothing left, these people would hit a wall. And instead of shattering, they'd undergo what he called psychological alchemy. Here's what Jung realized. Your empathy was never your weakness. It was your strength in training. Every time you absorbed someone's anger and transformed it into understanding, every time you felt someone's pain and responded with compassion, you were developing psychological muscles that most people never even know exist. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung observed that empaths don't just have heightened emotional sensitivity. They have what he called unconscious radar, the ability to detect psychological patterns, hidden motivations, and emotional manipulation with surgical precision. The problem is, most empaths use this radar to better serve others instead of protecting themselves. They sense someone's pain and immediately try to fix it. They detect someone's insecurity and rush to reassure them. They feel someone's anger and assume they must have caused it. But Jung discovered something that changes everything. When an empath finally awakens to their own power, that same radar becomes their greatest defense system. Jung identified 3 distinct stages that every awakening empath goes through, and understanding where you are in this process can literally save years of your life. Stage 1. The recognition. This is when you first realize you've been playing a rigged game. You start seeing the patterns, how you're always the one apologizing, how you're always managing everyone else's emotions, how you give and give and give. But somehow you're still the problem when you finally ask for something back. Jung called this the lifting of the veil. It's not a gentle awakening with soft music and meditation. It's more like someone turning on harsh fluorescent lights in a room you thought was beautifully candlelit. You see your family dynamics clearly for the first time. You recognize your workplace patterns. You understand why your relationships always follow the same exhausting script. And here's what Jung noted. This recognition phase is often triggered by one final, undeniable example of the pattern. One more time where you bend over backwards to help someone, and they still find a way to make you the villain. Stage 2. The integration. This is where Jung's concept of shadow work becomes crucial. You start reclaiming all the parts of yourself you've been taught to suppress. Your anger, your boundaries, your right to prioritize your own needs. But here's what most people don't understand about empath awakening. You don't lose your sensitivity. You weaponize it. That hyper-tuned awareness that used to make you vulnerable, now it makes you untouchable. You start sensing manipulation before it's fully formed. You feel someone gearing up to guilt trip you, and you shut it down before they even start. You detect that subtle energy shift when someone's about to make their problem your emergency, and you simply don't participate. Jung observed that awakened empaths develop what he called conscious compassion. You can feel someone's pain without taking responsibility for it. You can witness someone's struggle without jumping in to fix it. You can love someone while refusing to enable their dysfunction. Stage 3. The sovereignty. This is where you become truly dangerous to manipulative people, not because you attack them, but because you become immune to their tactics. Jung used the term individuation to describe this, becoming psychologically whole and self-directed. For empaths, this means you stop seeking external validation because you've learned to validate yourself. You stop trying to earn love because you've learned to love yourself. You stop managing others' emotions because you've learned that's not your job. Here's what terrifies manipulators. They can't predict your responses anymore. The old buttons they used to push, they're disconnected. The guilt trips that used to work, they bounce right off you. The drama that used to pull you in, you watch it like a movie you've seen too many times. Jung understood something profound about psychological power dynamics. Manipulators aren't actually powerful, they're parasitic. They need empaths to function. They need someone to absorb their projections, manage their emotions, and take responsibility for their choices. When you were unconsciously absorbing everyone's stuff, you were serving a crucial function in their psychological ecosystem. You were the emotional janitor, cleaning up messes you didn't make. You were the psychological dumping ground, storing toxic emotions that others couldn't handle. But awakened empaths, they stop participating in this dynamic entirely, and Jung observed something fascinating. Without empathic participation, manipulative people start falling apart. Think about it. What happens to a narcissist when they can't get narcissistic supply? What happens to a guilt tripper when their target doesn't feel guilty? What happens to an emotional vampire when their food source develops immunity? They don't just lose their power over you, they lose their ability to avoid their own inner work. Without you to carry their shadow material, they're forced to face it themselves. And that's the last thing they want to do. This is why Jung noted that awakened empaths often face escalation from toxic people. The manipulator's unconscious mind realizes the game is over, and they'll often make desperate attempts to pull you back into the old dynamic. They might love bomb you, trying to remind you of the good times. They might escalate their manipulation, hoping to overwhelm your new boundaries. They might even recruit others to pressure you back into your old role. But here's what Jung observed. If you can stay conscious during this phase, if you can maintain your sovereignty while they're having their tantrum, something beautiful happens. They either evolve or they exit your life. Either way, you win. Jung discovered something counterintuitive about empathic awakening. The more you integrate your shadow, your anger, your boundaries, your self-protection, the more genuinely compassionate you become. Most people think compassion means being a doormat. Jung understood that real compassion requires discernment. You can't truly love someone while enabling their worst behaviors. You can't genuinely help someone by doing for them what they should do for themselves. Awakened empaths develop what Jung called fierce compassion. They love people enough to let them face their own consequences. They care about people enough to refuse to rescue them from lessons they need to learn. This looks cold to people who are used to empathic dysfunction. They'll accuse you of being selfish, of not caring anymore, of thinking you're better than everyone. But Jung understood this reaction. When you stop playing your role in unconscious family or social systems, those systems will pressure you to go back to sleep. Here's how you know you're awakening. Toxic people start calling you toxic. Manipulators start accusing you of being manipulative. People who never respected your boundaries suddenly become very concerned about your attitude. Jung called this projection. They're seeing in you the very qualities they can't accept in themselves. Your clarity looks like coldness to someone who lives in confusion. Your boundaries look like cruelty to someone who has none. Your self-respect looks like arrogance to someone who has no relationship with their own worth. So what does this actually look like in your daily life? How do you recognize if you're going through this awakening process? In your relationships, you stop having the same exhausting conversations over and over. When someone tries to make you responsible for their emotions, you simply don't accept that responsibility. You might say something like, "I can see you're upset, and I hope you work through that." Then you disengage. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't actually trying to understand you. Jung observed that awakened empaths develop an almost psychic ability to distinguish between genuine confusion and manipulative questioning. At work, you stop absorbing the emotional climate of your workplace. You feel compassion for stressed colleagues without taking on their stress. You maintain professional boundaries without the guilt that used to accompany them. You become remarkably good at detecting workplace manipulators. That person who's always creating drama but never takes responsibility. You see through their act immediately. That boss who uses emotional manipulation instead of clear communication. Their tactics stop working on you. With family, this is often the most challenging arena because family systems are designed to keep everyone in their assigned roles. But awakened empaths learn to love their family members without sacrificing their own psychological health. You might still feel compassion for your mother's anxiety, but you don't take responsibility for managing it. You might understand why your sibling is struggling, but you don't rescue them from consequences they've created. Jung noted that this often creates temporary chaos in family systems. People don't know how to relate to the new you, but he observed that healthy family members eventually adjust and appreciate your authenticity, while unhealthy ones often distance themselves. Here's what Jung understood about individual psychological development. It impacts the collective. When you break free from unconscious patterns, you give others permission to do the same. Your awakening doesn't just transform your life, it creates what Jung called consciousness ripples in your environment. Other empaths start recognizing their own patterns. People start questioning dynamics they used to accept as normal. You become living proof that transformation is possible, not through aggression or manipulation, but through consciousness, boundaries, and authentic self-respect. Jung believed this is how collective healing happens, not through one person trying to fix everyone else, but through individuals becoming psychologically whole and modeling healthy relationship patterns. Remember what Jung said: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For empaths, this means embracing both your sensitivity and your strength, your compassion and your discernment. Your empathy isn't something to be managed or toned down. It's a sophisticated psychological tool that, when used consciously, makes you absolutely unmanipulatable. The toxic people in your life aren't afraid of your anger. They're afraid of your clarity. They're not threatened by your cruelty. They're terrified of your consciousness. Because once you see clearly, you can never be fooled again. Once you value yourself properly, you can never be undervalued. Once you understand your worth, you can never be convinced to settle for less. If you're going through this awakening process, know that you're not becoming cold or heartless. You're becoming sovereign. And that sovereignty? That's what Jung knew would transform not just your life, but the lives of everyone who encounters your authentic, empowered presence. Your sensitivity was never your weakness. It was your superpower in disguise, waiting for you to learn how to use it consciously. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments where you are in your empathic awakening journey.